The hillbilly is the image of a guy with a corncob pipe, remote, ignorant, barefoot, lazy, and so has really been a way of legitimating the dispossession of the mountains. It's a region of people who are depraved, not part of the American dream. They don't really deserve the kind of resources and wealth that lie beneath the land of Appalachia, particularly coal. It's only a region of trash, so why not trash it?
This is Amy, and you're listening to the Talkin' Appalachian podcast. You just heard author and coal miner advocate Barbara Ellen Smith talking about the hillbilly construct and how it's been used to keep the people of Appalachia deeply embedded in a stereotype. She was interviewed for the 2018 documentary titled Hillbilly, directed by Ashley York and Sally Rubin. And I'm excited to share with you an interview with Ashley York in this episode to talk about the documentary and what's in the works now as a follow-up. But first, let's talk about the word itself. There are two theories about where the word hillbilly started, according to linguist Michael Montgomery. One is that it came from hill plus billy, a Scots word that means fellow or comrade, or Billy, short for Billy Boy, a follower of King William III. Writer Ian Adamson wrote that some of the earliest Scotch-Irish traditional songs were, quote, ballads of King William of Orange, so those who sung them became known as Billy Boys of the Hill Country, or hillbillies, end quote. Montgomery writes that since the first known use of hillbilly in America wasn't until 1898, one can't be certain about the word's true origin. The Dictionary of American Regional English says that hillbilly is defined in the United States as a native of the Appalachian or Ozark Mountains. Its first recorded use was in Alabama in the late 19th century. Now, it's widely defined and used with respect by those who embrace it, but it's considered derogatory when used by outsiders. As Silas House writes in his essay for Talkin' Appalachian the book, we're generally taught here that the word is only acceptable when another hillbilly is using it. Hillbilly, the documentary film, examines the iconic hillbilly image in media and culture. The film explores more than 100 years of media representation of mountain and rural people and offers an urgent exploration of how we see and think about rural America. My personal takeaway after watching it the first time is that though not everyone will agree with every opinion or interpretation that's in the film, it leaves you thinking, it ignites conversation, and it exposes the way the people of Appalachia have been treated and talked about for over a century. But it also explores a diverse and a resilient region and people through the eyes of its residents, the media, scholars, and artists. And the word hillbilly is a really good starting point for that discussion. So let's turn now to my interview with Kentucky-born Ashley York. Based in Los Angeles, Ashley York is a successful journalist and filmmaker who has worked on Academy Award-winning teams and on projects that have won top honors at the Sundance, Los Angeles, and XSSW film festivals, as well as on Apple TV+, Netflix, and HBO. Her film Hillbilly won a London Foreign Press Award and the Best Documentary Award at the LA Film Festival. She also directed and produced the Netflix original documentary Tig, an official selection of the Sundance Film Festival. So here's my conversation with Ashley about Hillbilly.
On one hand, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to talk about this work again, and it just shows how relevant the conversation and discourse is about Appalachia and the people who live there, and the importance of how media representations affect the world and culture and politics in America. So when I got your email, it was an automatic, like, yes, of course, because we are in the process of raising money to make a follow-up to Hillbilly. Working title is Appalachian Reckoning, based on the book by Meredith McCarroll and Tony Harkins, which is a co-edited volume that was in response to J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy, and it was Appalachian citizens and writers and poets who wrote pieces and contributed to that volume. So that's very much the inspiration for the follow-up and just continuing the work that we started in Hillbilly, because as proud as I am of the film, it's the beginning of a life's work and of a topic that needs to be examined and explored. And I have a commitment to creating community, elevating community in the South and in Appalachia. So, this is all an extension of that and part of it. So I was very happy to. I mean, when you make a feature film, it's able to do many things, and it is a cinematic portrait, and it's visual, and it's a sonic world. And we brought together so many of my heroes, from Bell Hooks to Silas House to Frank X. Walker to Crystal Good, who I met in the making of that film, and Crystal Wilkinson. Those are both main participants in the follow-up. And I've continued to, raise a little money here and go film something, but, we just haven't been able to pull it all together for the purposes of a feature. But I feel like the time is now, and it's a great time. And certainly with the election coming up, I would love to take Hillbilly on the road and do a tour of the film, even a shortened version, to just inspire youth to get involved in politics and in voting, because political and media literacy is central to everything that we're talking about. And I very much feel that the film is a tool.
To send my questions going way back in time, back to the 90s. You probably have you seen Rory Kennedy's documentary, American Hollow? First documentary about Appalachia, I think, that I saw that was actually done close by, and she screened the film, I believe, in Whitesburg not long after it came out, and people were not kind about that. I enjoyed watching it, but I'm a Central Appalachian. I grew up in Lake County, and I understood that family. I guess I come at some of this from a different perspective, but what are your thoughts?
It came out in 1999, which at that time I was a sophomore in college at the University of Kentucky, and I was very much entering the phase of my life where I was studying journalism and learning the practice of journalism. I took a sociology class, and the professor showed Harlan County, USA. And that film, I was like, whoa, like it was the first time that I had ever seen the folks of Appalachia be represented with dignity and with grace. And it was a verite film, and we're, following along, and we're just fully immersed in the journey of these coal miners and their families, who are fighting the union for a better contract. So, that was the film that I was watching in 1999. Now, American Hollow, I remember my mother watching it, and she was very amused by it, and she was like, oh, you have to see this. And I think part of that is because it's a film about us, right? So in some ways there's a spectacle there, and of course there's truth in all stereotypes. I think I knew, and when I look at it now on the internet and I see the images, I mean, with all due respect to the people and to Rory Kennedy and her filmmaking practice, and I know her dad was committed to the people of West Virginia and to their stories and to talking about poverty in a way that didn't blame the people for their own poverty. So, I want to be respectful in that way. But, at the same time, there's a difference when an outsider comes in and makes a film about the poorest people up the holler. And grew up in the holler. And look, there were folks who, were certainly, very poor. There were also people who were millionaires who lived up the holler. So, that's the part where we have to be critical about a film like that. And what I didn't know at that time, I was starting to learn that media is created, and media, it's a system. I teach, and if I ever do a class on Appalachia media representations, I, could certainly put it in there, or perhaps in the follow-up to Hillbilly, currently titled Appalachian Reckoning, maybe we will do a segment on American Hollow and interview Rory Kennedy. She's here in Los Angeles. I have some connections to her. I've never met her. I would love to. She's a very prolific and successful documentarian and filmmaker. And I would be very curious, to hear her speak about the film. And who knows, maybe she wants to be a partner in Appalachian Reckoning. So Rory Kennedy, if you're out there listening, maybe we could make something together. And again, it's this insider outsider conversation is something that came up early on in our filmmaking practice. And, when we first reached out to many of the scholars who are featured in the film, we did that in advance of going to the Appalachian Studies Conference. And we said, hey, me and Sally Rubin, my co-director and producing partner on the film, said we want to make this film called, we didn't know it was called Hillbilly, but we wanted to make a film about the hillbilly image in media and culture. And they're sort of like, oh, goodness, what are they going to do? And I think they probably fear that we're going to do, another one of these representations like the one that I saw as a kid, right, as a third grader, that piece called Another America. It's featured in Hillbilly. It's the one where, it was a news program, and it was called Another America, and it was on the news. And that came out when I was around 8 or 9 in third grade. And that's the program that I saw that just traumatized me. I mean, I had no language or literacy or ability to speak about what I was seeing on national television, but I knew it was about us and I knew it wasn't good. And I knew we weren't all like that. And I knew that it was something that was very much from that outsider perspective. The next day at school, nobody talked about it. It wasn't like there was some like, hey, let's all come together and talk about what we just saw and let's talk critically about this and let's talk about the media culture. But everybody was ashamed. There was this shared sense of shame that we all felt, knowing that once again, our town and place in Eastern Kentucky had been exploited terribly on national television for the world to see. And, I think that's very similar now to the criticism that we hear about J.D. Vance and his book Hillbilly Elegy, this guy who has a right, certainly, to tell his own story as a memoir. But then when he starts to essentialize the whole damn community as being lazy and on welfare and dope heads, like it's just not right. And then to like just do it in the interest of gaining power and to it's just lies, and it's not fair and it's not right, and somebody needs to call that out. So from a very early age, remember these representations, and they had a tremendous impact on me. And while as an 8-year-old I wasn't like, I'm going to go be a journalist and I'm going to go learn how to make documentaries and say something about this, I do think that I was very impacted by that. And it influenced my desire and wish and want to be a storyteller, to tell stories, and to meet people who weren't like me, and to explore the world through storytelling.
You didn't include Vance's book in Hillbilly.
We did not.
Because it came out in 2016, but you were filming then, right? So
we were. So, J.D. Vance and his book, Hillbilly Elegy, came out in the midst of us making this film. Hillbilly was an independent film. It was financed with funding support through the National Endowment for Humanities primarily, and several humanities councils. So West Virginia Humanities, Kentucky Arts, any state that had a humanities council in Appalachia, we went to them for funding. Ohio Humanities gave us a very nice grant. And we worked with a lot of partners to raise the money. It's not a film that would exist without that support. So we started making the film in 2013. It took 5 years from beginning to end. So by the time the election comes, we just thought, hey, the election is a way to bring everybody together. It's a civic activity. People are out and about on their feet. It's a way for us to bring our ensemble together and have this giant happy ending. So the book comes out. It's a bestseller. I mean, it sat on the bestseller list for something like 50 or 60 weeks. We would hear about it. I had a Google alert on Hillbilly the whole time. So I would see it come up. People in the Appalachian Studies community, which is a very vibrant, dynamic, diverse, vast community, start talking about the book. We were very involved in those circles. People were, offering their criticisms of the book. And I was just similar to, some of these other programs. I think I was just like, no, thanks. I know what that is. But then it got to a point where I could not read it because people kept asking me about it. So I was like, all right, let me read it. Now, meanwhile, my stepdad had sent me the book. He's from New Jersey, lived in Florida. And he was like, oh my God, I've read this book. You've got to read it. This is great. So he sends it to me. He could read a book in a day. So he sent it to me, and it sat on my coffee table for months. And I'd put it in a stack, and then, I decided to read it, but I was like, I'm not going to read this at home. I'm going to read it on the plane. We were flying all the time, all over. And so I would read it in flight. I didn't finish it, but I do remember very clearly that the end of chapter 1 and the end of chapter 2, it's that feeling that it gives you, right? Where it's like those dreadful hillbilly people, and it was just like, oh my God. Follow up to Hillbilly, I definitely want to make room to explore this book, to explore its impact, to explore its damage, frankly, to the people of Appalachia and just to Americans at large. I mean, really, anybody who's working class is harmed by a text like that. And so many of us are working class, the middle class is like eroded and evaporated before our eyes. And so many of us are working people. And again, I support people writing books, selling their work, making art. Great, go for it. Get all that you can. But just the way Vance has done it and just how hateful he is toward women and toward immigrants. It's just, now that he's the candidate to be the vice president of the United States. First act of your movie, you identify the problem. And I think that Hillbilly Elegy is part of it, certainly. And we knew that at the time. We had such a vast tapestry that we were already immersed in, and the election was a part of what we were doing, but we didn't get deep in the weeds. Like I remember, the night of the election, we were filming in Berea, Kentucky. We filmed all over. We filmed in Lexington. We filmed with my Granny Shelby up in northern Kentucky, and then we filmed at Berea, which is where we ended the day and where we watched the results. And I ended up staying up the whole night. And I remember seeing him on the ABC panel, and I was like, wow, it's pretty incredible that he found himself in that position, which shows you the limitation of rural voices in national news, right? I'd love to sit on that panel, right, and talk about the people of Appalachia and working people and the nuance there, and how, of course, we can talk about stereotypes, but we can also talk about the rich diversity and progressive politics that exists there, and the people like Silas House and Crystal Good and Crystal Wilkinson who fight the good fight every day to make their communities better.
It's a tricky word. It's a tricky thing to talk about, even as an Appalachian. Hillbilly is a tricky thing to talk about because of that insider outsider thing. Very complicated and very multi-layered. And I was talking with someone before I started recording this episode with you, who said that they had ordered Appalachian Reckoning, but they hadn't read Hillbilly Elegy, and they refused to. And I said, listen, I understand that, but I think you're going to get more out of Appalachian Reckoning maybe if you read that first, and you'll understand it's a response to that. I said, but read it. And don't let everybody else tell you what to think. Read it for yourself and decide what you think. So the conversation right now is really loud. And I'm a person that likes to sit back and just listen and take it all in and do my research. And I know what my thoughts are, but I'm very much about, let's, like you said, know what it says so that you can, respond to it. But I think no matter who you are or what it is you're writing about or doing with that word and this region, it's complicated. I'm still very careful, I think, in a lot of ways, because nothing is true of everybody everywhere all the time. Even in Appalachia, and I catch myself saying Appalachia, and I have to qualify that, some parts of Appalachia or rural Appalachia, not all of Appalachia. It's very different, big region. I think one of the things I wanted to talk about, one of the most moving parts of Hillbilly was your interview with Billy Redden.
Get more from an audio drama than just escapism. Get immersed into the heart of 14th century Europe.
This miasma is causing great mortality.
As you travel alongside a light of higher consciousness.
You do things that are wholly unnatural.
Is it not more unnatural to sever the fingers from your own hand, as you have done of yourself from the other organs of the body we call Earth?
Surrender not the flame. The Muin Mystery Adventure arrives on all major podcast platforms September 24th.
Billy Redden, dear Billy Redden.
Banjo-pickin boy in Deliverance.
Yeah.
How much money did you make for your role in Deliverance?
I made $500. I wished I could be an actor. I just like to go to Los Angeles. That's my dream. I'm hoping I'll get there one day, but I don't think it's going to happen.
I am not surprised to know, and it's certainly within the realm of understanding, that that's what he would have been paid. As a local kid who was picked out of a classroom, they had him do a deal. It wasn't like a SAG deal, which is the Screen Actors Guild, which would have entitled him to royalties. But I think he was sort of treated, you know what I mean? He wasn't an actor. He wasn't part of the Screen Actors Guild. And I imagine the rules. I am by no means an expert on the Guild rules and regulations and how they've changed and progressed since Deliverance came out in the 70s. But he just wasn't entitled to it based on the terms of his deal.
He could not have imagined how his image would be used And still, if you Google Banjo Boy and Deliverance or something similar, I mean, it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's a cultural phenomenon,
He really
without a
is.
doubt.
Now, he wasn't playing the banjo. He had someone sitting behind him.
That's correct. There's a picture of that. Yeah, that one is where I don't know that I have that picture. I mean, I know we have it somewhere in the archive, but no, there's a picture of the porch, and you see him and you see the person up under the porch who played for him. So he has since learned to play the banjo some. I've seen him do some press events and things. And recently I saw one come up a few months ago. We lost touch. I've got a Christmas present here for him. So Billy, if you're out there listening, I need to know your address. He moved. His mother died. And, he retired from Walmart, thankfully, and, moved on. And the number I had, wasn't working. So I used to reach him at Walmart. Anytime I couldn't reach him on his phone, I'd just call Walmart and they would tell me when his shift wasn't to call back. So Billy, I mean, what a gift. He was one of the very first people that we thought of when we decided to make the movie. You can't make a film about media representations of Appalachia and rural folks without telling the story of Deliverance, because that's such a powerful representation that, for better or for worse, people cite for how it represents the place, because it's such a stunning representation of the place. And my dad loves Deliverance. It's like his favorite movie.
Well, it got critical acclaim. Didn't it win an Oscar?
It was nominated. Yeah, in the film, we have a quick push into the graphic of the Academy Awards, but I don't think it won. But, it was, really well known, and it was a risky filming endeavor. Like, the actors had to agree. Again, they made that film. I think the reason that somebody like Billy Redden can end up in it for $500 is because they were making a film like a documentary in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it's based on a book. They went to the town. The actors had to agree to do it without the typical type of insurance, because the insurance companies would not pay for them to get on the river and do all this white water rafting. But that was very important to the director as a representation of the book. So, it's all sort of being made like a documentary in a lot of ways, I would say, but with Hollywood actors. So, but Billy was great. I mean, there was a filmmaker who had started making a film about him, and she had a crowdfunding page. And that's how we got in touch with him. I don't know if she ever finished her film. I hope she did. And she was very kind to share his contact info with us. And she did it because she said, I want to support him in any way that I can. He's had a lot of hardship. He struggles financially. He's working as an hourly worker at Walmart. So, here's his info. And I reached out to him. We spoke on the phone. And when we went to the first filming that we did was at that Appalachian Studies conference, where we met Silas House and several of the other scholars in the film. And then we drove down to Georgia and we spent time with Billy. We met him at the Huddle House, which he went to every day. And, I think it would be the latter shoots that we would film at Walmart with him. We ended up spending 3 different sessions with him. And we brought him out to Los Angeles. People always ask, did he ever make it to Los Angeles? And he did. When we got into the Los Angeles Film Festival in the summer of 2018, we were like, let's bring Billy to Los Angeles, because he says in that interview in the parking lot, I hope to get there someday. So we, did a small crowdfunding campaign for him. We raised the money. He flew in. I picked him up at Los Angeles International. We went to lunch down there in Marina del Rey. We took him to a hotel in Koreatown, really lovely, cool hang called the Line Hotel. He stayed there. I took him to Warner Brothers to the tour. He and I did that. And he was so proud. He walked around and he was going up to people and he's like, have you seen Deliverance? Did you know I'm the banjo-pickin boy in Deliverance? But he was so proud. And then the screening was that night at the ArcLight, which is an incredible theater in Hollywood. And they did a red carpet and we were there on a Saturday night. I mean, it was a really, really gorgeous experience. And, we had a Q&A with the director's chairs and he brought pictures that he had signed and he sold those. So, we were really happy that we were able to do that for him. And then we were the opening night film at the Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And Billy had a couple friends drive him to that festival, and he went to the Goodwill and he bought a suit, which I thought was so sharp and sophisticated of him to do. And, we had a great time that evening too. And there's some nice pictures from that screening in both the LA Film Festival and Hot Springs. So, but he was great. I mean, Billy is just emblematic of the type of participant that you dream of in a documentary, someone who just they're participating because they have a story to tell. And, it turned out that he had something really important to teach us about how he came to be part of the film, how it was the time of his life. It's one of the best things that's ever happened to him in his life. But that doesn't mean it's all perfect. And in fact, it's very imperfect in that he didn't know as a 13-year-old kid who's the kid on the porch that there was this horrific scene with sexual assault in it that the film would become known for, and that would become this joke about where we're from. And, that's terrible. Like, that's just, ugh. And that really hurts him. And, I think he felt some responsibility for that. That wasn't his doing, and he didn't get approval rights on the script. And I don't think they even let him read the script, right? They recruited him and said, hey, play this part. And, that was that. What an incredible soul is what I'll say about Billy Redden. I'm grateful that I got to meet him in this life, and that we made history together, and that his perspective can live in the documentary Hillbilly. Maybe we should follow up with him for Hillbilly Part 2, and we do a retirement party for him. Wouldn't that be fun?
Talk about Appalachian Englishes in the documentary, which is that's my area of study, and the podcast is based on the book that I co-edited on Appalachian dialects. Part of the reason I was inspired to do that was because our dialects are often misunderstood, stigmatized, stereotyped, associated with the stereotypical hillbilly image. And you touch on that. But I'm curious, because you're from Kentucky and because I can still hear Kentucky in your voice, what's it like to live in Los Angeles with Kentucky still living in your voice?
Mr. Dan Carlin, welcome to the History Shorts podcast.
Happy to do it. I wish you all the luck in the world, and I'm glad you're doing this too. Congratulations.
Hi everyone, my name is Peter Zablocki, a historian and a host of the History Shorts podcast. If you are a fan of serious yet fun history, then it might be time to squeeze History Shorts into your daily routine. From everyday 10-minute episodes on often stupefying history to weekly interviews with top historians, the History Shorts podcast is your one-stop shop for easily accessible history. See you on your favorite podcast app.
I'm so proud to be a Kentuckian. I really am. And I'm proud to speak the way that I do. And this is a new moment for me in that way of fully embracing it and being grateful for it, and to honoring what it means about where I'm from, and to all those who came before me, particularly my grandmothers who, dreamed about moving on in their lives and going to college or just having an education. I mean, two of my grandmothers went to 8th grade only, and they just wanted to learn and to study. And of course, all of these dynamics play into that, right? Like that access to opportunity. So I'm at a new place with it, as far as not actively trying to code switch all the time or change the way that I speak or feel shame and trouble over it. I've spent a lot of time that I'm not going to get back negotiating those feelings, as so many of us have and do. Sure. And it's just part of being a person from Appalachia, given its history and the way that it's been ridiculed. So, but about every day still, I get asked, where are you from? And sometimes people say it in a very eloquent way, and sometimes people say it in an insulting way, and sometimes I don't quite know. So, I'll turn it on them and say, well, where do you think I'm from? And rarely, I mean, never really do they say Kentucky. The other day they say Texas, they say Oklahoma, they say Alabama. I met a guy, who was it? I don't, I meet so many people and I talk to so many people day in and day out, but he was like, I got a buddy from down in East Tennessee and you sound just like him. One day I was at a store and talking to the clerk, and he's like, you sound just like Dolly Parton. And then he starts going on, rambling on. And I went to a Memorial Day party when I first met my now husband of 5 years. He took me to this Memorial Day party, and I just met him. And we were about to leave, and we didn't really know a lot of people there. And we encountered this lady, and we started talking, and she just starts like singing the Beverly Hillbillies and Deliverance, and she starts this whole monologue in response to me, and I was just like horrified, like, what is this? Like, it's not funny, and it says more about her than me. But I mean, I've seen all sorts of expressions and responses. Most people are gracious now, I would say. Like, I really do believe that. I can't say what they're thinking, of course, but, overwhelmingly people comment on it in a way that, they say it's lovely, or I appreciate it, or they're curious, but I've definitely taken great effort to change the way that I speak and to modify it and to, get rid of my accent, which I'm no longer trying to do, but I also realize that it's changed compared to, say, my mother, who never made any effort to change the way that she speaks. But I think it's a real honor and a real gift. I sure do. It's special.
You put it so well about the whole idea of negotiating with it, because I've done that my whole life too as an academic. I have the good fortune of living and working here in Central Appalachia, so I think it's kind of expected, but it doesn't mean that you don't get that kind of negative feedback sometimes from different people. And even in Central Appalachia, I still encounter teachers and professors even who tell students, you don't want to sound like a hillbilly, so don't talk that way. It shocks me, but then it doesn't shock me. It shouldn't shock me, but it does. And part 2 of my book, that's where people like Silas and Crystal and Lee Smith and Ron Rash and Denise Sheridina and just all these wonderful people I met at the Appalachian Writers Workshop at Heinemann. Have you been there to the Appalachian Writers Workshop? It's going on right now.
I participated one summer. I just had the baby, and it was COVID. So it was all Zoom, and it was great. And I was so grateful for the opportunity to be part of it and to do the keynote and to do some workshops on documentary making, and glad that it was able to go on despite COVID. But of course, it's a totally different experience to be on Zoom with a newborn, as opposed to being like on the ground there. So it is a place that I want to go back, and I certainly know of its legacy.
I met them all there over the years, and they wrote pieces or gave me pieces from published work about voice and about Georgella Lyon and her wonderful essay, Voice Place, which is a word that I just love and use.
Voice Place.
Voice Place.
What does that mean?
Voice Place and people who cultivated your first voice.
That's great. I'm going to write that down.
Voice, she puts it, I'm trying to say it the way she says it. It's the voice that is tuned by the people and places that made you. That's your voice. Yeah. We've all experienced it, unless you grew up in a household where you were made to speak only standard English. When I watched your documentary, that was the first, like, my ear picks up on language first thing. And I thought, I love your accent. Your grammar's standardized like mine, but your accent is there. And that's when people erase or level their dialects, that's the last thing to go, is accent. You can change your words and you can change your grammar, and that's usually not difficult. But accent is the hardest thing to erase. You have to be very conscious about it. That's what I love about Silas. Silas has not compromised his accent one bit.
I love that. When we met him, Sally, the co-director on the film, she had interviewed him for her prior film. And so that was our end to him. And he was the keynote at the Appalachian Studies Association conference the spring that we started the film. And that was the first place that we went. And we were putting, the microphone on him. So, because we were recording the session. And, it was really quick. And, I was the sound recordist and I was doing the mic, and I saw his gorgeous blue eyes. And then I heard the way that he spoke, and I was just like, whoa. I mean, it was just one of the most enchanting moments of my life. And I knew in that moment, I was like, he is incredibly important. And he, as a result, needs to have a meaningful role in the making of this film as a participant, but also as a collaborator. And Silas was with us the whole time, and he helped us with writing. He helped us with, I credit him fully with getting Bell Hooks into the film and getting us in her living room in January of 2015, which was a dream come true.
My mission is to educate people as much as possible, just like you, with this whole notion of speaking this way does not mean we're ignorant. Speaking this way does not mean we're all this, right? Just because it's been paired with this character in this movie or this character in the comic books or
Right.
this character on a TV show.
Well, that's the thing, is so much of what people think comes from these very limited perspectives about what you see on Saturday Night Live or in a film like Deliverance. And it's like, my God, but in my mind now, I've progressed to the point where I think that our accent is as lovely as English accents, which people admire and adore all over the world. So I do have hope that we can get there, and that we just have to keep speaking the way that we do, and having conversations about it, and encouraging discourse about how hard it can be to carry the accent, because there is discrimination, and discrimination hides in plain sight.
That's the important thing, isn't it? That especially in this national conversation that's happening now, that Appalachian voices are heard, that we make sure we're heard, that we are right up there in the dominant place with everybody else having this discussion about what it means to be a hillbilly and the people of Appalachia and the issues that we face and things like that.
Appalachia is a wound and a joy and a poem, a knot of complication. But you cannot know a place without loving it and hating it and feeling everything in between. Something inside you has to crack to let in the light, so your eyes and brain and heart can adjust properly. Those attempting to portray the region must become immersed in the region in a special kind of way. They must go to the mountains, drive these winding roads. They must sit and jaw for a while with folks on the front porches, must attend weddings and high school graduations. They must study the history of the place and come to understand it. They must sit at a wake and look at the lines on the faces of the people, the calluses on their hands. They must understand the gestational and generational complexities of poverty and pride and culture. They must stand for a while outside and smell the air, study the gravestones on the hillsides that await the inscriptions of names belonging to people, not statistics, not stereotypes.
I do want to direct people to our Vimeo page where you can rent or buy the film. It is available on Tubi, but it has commercials, and it's also available on Amazon for purchase. But if you get it on Vimeo, that money comes directly to us filmmakers. Our distributor went bankrupt and disappeared and hasn't paid royalties to anybody in a very long time. So we are in a place now where we can, reclaim our rights and sell the film, which is really meaningful. And I just put it up on Vimeo, so you can rent or buy it there. So, and it's cool, right? It's cool that the internet has progressed to a point where you can put your movie on the internet and you can let people rent it or buy it directly from you. That's really fantastic. We always knew that the film would find a very loving audience in Appalachia and in rural communities. We were never worried about that because of our methodology in making it and working with scholars and working with folks like Silas House and Crystal Wilkinson and Crystal Good and, all of the heroes in the film. But what we were worried about was how urban audiences would receive the film, if at all. I mean, of course, we tried to get financing from a lot of these entities, and nobody was interested. They hear the titles Hillbilly and it's like, oh, that's not for us. That's off brand. I remember the Sundance Institute very specifically. And my first film was a world premiere at Sundance, Tig, right? About Tig Notaro. It's a Netflix film. So I'd had a history with them, but when we submitted to the Sundance Documentary Fund, I remember very clearly, this is when they used to still send physical letters and, they'd handwrite the note, like, this film isn't for us. And that was the note. Whereas often I've applied to Sundance many times and been rejected. The note will often be, come back to us when you have more to show or when the creative direction is more clear, visible. It's hard. It's very hard to get a film where it needs to be. Very hard. And Hillbilly certainly was. I mean, we were dealing with so much madness out there of all these clips and stereotypes and trying to give context to that and reference that, but also put that in the background, which is where these portraits of other folks came from. The portrait of the Appalachian poets that you see Frank X. Walker leading and that Crystal Good is part of. She has that great line, I'll never be a white feminist, which I always just, again, that moment, you're like, okay, wow, I want Crystal to be in my life forever. There's so much for me to learn from her. And I've been in talks with her for 4 years about the follow-up film and have filmed with her. And she's launched a newspaper called Black by God, which is about centering Black voices in West Virginia. But the film, we were worried about urban audiences receiving it. And part of our impact campaign was to make a plan for getting the film to reach an audience outside of Appalachia. So we did some screenings in San Francisco and in New York City, and I was so worried about New York City. We got into Doc NYC, and we did our theatrical run in New York City the week after Thanksgiving, and I was just like so worried. I was like, oh God, just all that trauma comes there, about how they're going to respond. And of course, like in San Francisco and New York, like there are guys in the audience crying, saying, I am from there. I ran away, either because I was gay or, for whatever reason. And thank you for this. All people think about is Hillbilly Elegy, and this is everything. So, we saw that overwhelmingly. And we ended up winning the LA Film Festival, which I was like, what? I mean, we got in for one. They only accepted 10 documentaries, 10 features. We are the reigning champion of that festival because it went down that same year. So we were very proud of that. And, for the film to have the showing that it did here. And, again, every town that we went to, people would come up to us and say thanks. Like I see myself in this film. My Aunt Regina, who did a Fulbright and went to Spain in high school and wanted to get out and knew she's in the film. Also, she stood up at the Nashville Film Festival and said, thank you. I've run away from this place my whole life. And this film helps me appreciate and hold on to this identity that I tried so hard to distance myself from. So, from a very personal level to, a broader level, the film has definitely changed the way people think. And I'm really grateful for that. And there's more to be done. And I want to continue sharing it because these representations do matter, and especially for youth. So, to be continued. Countries around the world where we would hear similar comments. I see similarities with where you're from and the town next door here in Prague. So, it's more universal than many of us know and think, and there's power in that. And sure. I feel so grateful that I finally got to tell these stories.
It is really important work that you have done and that you're continuing to do. It's important for me as a co-director of a Center for Appalachian Studies that I can bring work like the work you create to my students and screen it here and share it. Just want to continue to educate people. Like you said, I think the universal appeal, mountain culture is worldwide, rural culture is worldwide, and we're more alike than we realize. And that's why, like you said, these themes resonate. We can see a little bit of ourselves no matter who we are. But people who reject it, I think, are the people that don't want to see that.
Sure. That reminds me, I was teaching a graduate class at USC last fall, and it was a class of visual anthropologists who were learning cinematic practices for their own films. And one of the students, Xiaoyu, was from a rural town in China. And he was just like, he ended up doing his whole film about the way politics and media representations exploit and put down working people and rural people and make them look like they're drunks and make it look like the same stereotypes were coming up there. And the politicians were using the same type of rhetoric to gain power. And I was just like, wow, like that was really important to learn and to hear.